Good morning, everyone. I have the sun directly ahead of me. Let me see if I can get into some shade. Yesterday was moving day, so I didn't do a whole lot of exploring. Now I'm up, I've had my coffee, spent my time with the Lord, so it's time to see what's out here. I found a trail. I don't have my map, so I'm not going very far. Apparently it runs right behind my campsite. I just can't see it because the brush there is higher than what would allow me to know this was here. So I'm going to have to go back and find out where this is at, where it leads. Like I said, I love exploring. Okay. We've been talking about us and getting tired of trying to be a Christian without Christ. Well, we don't have to. Sometimes we forget. Yep, this is an official trail. It's got markings on the tree. Blue. Where's my tent at? Okay, we're coming up to it. I guess I see what's happening. The trail turns away from my campsite because my campsite is right up to the right. I can see the car. There's the tent. And there's no trail. See, there's my tent's on the other side of that. So there's no way I can cut straight through. Oh well, I'm okay. We got to realize that we weren't meant to function without the Spirit working with us. We're still in our sin nature, but we have the Spirit in us now that the early Christians, or the early believers, I should say, didn't have. The ones before Christ. And yet they got along. But they repeatedly get close to God, wander off. Get punished, come back, get close to God, wander off. It's just like a sine wave. But we don't have to go through that because we have the Spirit to guide us daily. You say, well, how can you do that? It's impossible. Nothing's impossible for God. Everything's impossible for us. The key to remember here on this is that Jesus went through all this himself. He served multiple purposes coming to earth. And one of them certainly was to prove to us that we could do it. He had to be sin-free. He had to be blemish-free when he went up on the cross. You have to be a perfect sacrifice. He made it through his 30 years before he started his actual ministry. 33 years roughly before he was crucified. So he made it through that many years without failing. It's hard for us to imagine how that's possible, but anything's possible through God. But I sit and I try to think sometimes, what would have life been like back then? Well, one, it was a dangerous place for, no Christians yet, but dangerous place for Jews because the Romans were in charge of the entire territory. And that's why when he was born, we know the story. Caesar Augustus ordered a census in the entire Roman Empire. It wasn't just for the Jews. Why would you order a census? So you'd know how much money you could tax. They didn't just give them their name, but they had to give them, their occupation, how much money they made. and their tax was levied on them. So that's why they had to go to Bethlehem, house of Ham, or, okay, this is mile marker 4. I assume that's, if I started the trail correctly, I would have covered 4 miles. Wow, I've already done it. So they would have gone to Bethlehem for Christ to be born. And because everybody was having to go home to their hometown, it was full. Everybody born there had to go back. Then along comes the 3 wise guys, probably from Babylon. They're the only ones that would have, from the east, that would have known the lore of the king's star and what it meant to have the king of the Jews born. Remember, they were exiled there for 70 years, and not everybody came back, so a lot of them stayed there. These 3 wise men saw the signs and headed to Jerusalem, the capital of the area there. Again, being ex-Jews, or still Jews, but in a different country, they traveled there. It would not have been a quick, easy travel, but they would have had a big entourage. Camels, when you're traveling like that, you have to bring food, water, and if these guys were well off, cooks and people to take care of them. Okay, well, I know where I'm at now on the road. Looks like the trail continues on, but I'm going to probably turn back. I don't know how far this goes, but I don't think you want to go with me all the way. I do have a friend here. They've done some seasonal decorating here. Most people have no idea of the meaning of Halloween, so be tolerant of them. If your church is big enough and can afford to do a fall festival, that's the alternative. But if not, don't blend in, but don't condemn people for doing it. Be forgiving. All right, I'm walking back on the same path. It's either that or I go up and walk on the road, and I don't want to do that. I'll go get my map and see where this goes to and see if I want to hike it. I will eventually here. And I guess I might have to do this today anyway because we have a major storm coming in, probably tonight. Rain today, maybe tomorrow. A day off, and I think we got rain for this weekend. That sun's right behind me. Let me get the camera up so I don't have it pointing into the camera. But anyhow, I'm trying to figure out, what Jesus' life would have been like. Well, as a little kid, he had to travel a lot. Because when the wise men told Herod and he ordered all the babies to conceive, he said up to 2 years. It could have taken the wise men a year or two to come to him, plus whatever time it took for Herod to figure out they didn't come back. So the wise men were not there at his birth. But they got there shortly after. Gave them enough money, essentially, frankincense coming from different parts, myrrh, very expensive goods that you could sell or trade, and they did. Myrrh, of course, comes from Smyrna. Myrrh. Don't see an easy way through here without breaking through some branches, so I'll go back around where I came in. But that's how they could afford to travel, because they had to flee to Egypt and stay there until Herod died. We really don't have a whole lot that talks about his youth. So let's talk about use of time in general. He had to learn to walk like all babies do, learn to eat. Now Luke does say, I'll have to look up the verse, Luke does say that he was a very precocious child. That meaning is that he was behaving older than his years. So he was smart. We know when he was 12, he broke away from his parents and got away from them, and then started talking in the temple to the religious leaders, and they were amazed at his knowledge at that age. We shouldn't be amazed because we know who he is, but of course they didn't at that time. He had to work. Most parents looked forward to children back then to help them in their business. I've got a sign here, the red bay. Red bay is a small, medium-sized tree or shrub. The dark green, leathery evergreen leaves are very aromatic. Smells like leather. Interesting. Can be used to flavor soups or other food. Birds eat the bitter, dark blue or blackish fruit, which there aren't any on it. Mostly found in coastal swamps. Well, we're essentially on the edge of a swamp, the Okefenokee, so makes sense for them to be here. But Jesus was raised by his father Joseph, who was a carpenter, and he became a carpenter. It's typical, traditional for children to learn their father's trade. Quite often children didn't want to do that, but I'm sure Jesus was obedient. We have stories of the prodigal son and others who didn't want to stay and do that, probably because they did it all their life and they didn't see the advantage of it. So they had to get out and see the world and realize that they had a good deal. But I'm sure Jesus was a good kid growing up. Probably didn't get into trouble, but probably was told to, most kids are told to be quiet and listen. That's always been the case for the children. So how much did he have to learn as a child? I don't know. I'm sure they didn't have to tell him repeatedly to do this, but children like to play. Did he play? I don't know. What would kids play back then. Okay, I have another sign. This is a dry retention area. Practice for providing drainage while still keeping the water on the site. So there's plenty of bushes and things over here and shade to keep the water once it's caught. That makes sense. I'm trying to look off into the distance now. The leaves are still here, as I mentioned yesterday or on my other video. Where up north the leaves are falling off fast, changing color and falling off fast. If you look around me, you can see that there are some leaves changing. Look back in there, there's still a lot of green. The only leaves that don't change are pine type leaves. All right, I'm still wandering on this trail that I don't know where it goes, so I'm going to head on up to the camp ring up here. But I mean, questions that I still have are, I'm sure if he was a carpenter, he hit his thumb at least once or finger at least once. You can't work with hand tools, especially as you're learning them, and not smash your thumb or finger or something. Maybe he cut himself from time to time. How'd they take care of him? First aid back then was wrap it up, put some kind of salve on it, and hope it heals. What were his abilities? I mean, we watched some of the kooky TV shows of the 70s. So you see a show like Bewitched, and these were, again, harmless, but introducing witchcraft. But I remember watching them growing up. And then they have the girl born, and they're waiting to see if she's a witch too. But she could perform some things by wiggling her nose. So they showed her starting off immediately with the ability. Now, I know that's not a direct relation because it's fiction and it's getting into areas that we got to be careful with. But how did Jesus start? Did he walk up to a creek and part the water and walk across? We don't know. There's no record of it. We don't have any early record of him growing up. It's too bad. I wish we would have had more. We know that he was tempted as we are, and he survived without sinning. So every time we get tempted and we fail, just know that Jesus never did. Now, we probably didn't get the Spirit immediately on birth. We had to wait till we were old enough to make a decision. So, early times were on our own. But after we've got the Spirit, there's no excuse. That's why we're told that, how many times do we forgive somebody? 70 times 7. Most of us can't think of sins that we can do that much. Well, not if we think of the big ones, but if we think of little ones, like I mentioned yesterday, we don't know. I mean, we may know what to say to somebody, but if we walk up to a room full of people, who does God want us to talk to? Yes, we could talk to every one of them in there, and we may. But if we only had to go there for one person, who would that be? Only God knows that. We don't. So it's a sin to talk to the wrong person if God wanted us to talk to the other one. We could sin, 1,000 times a day and not realize it, just simply being in the wrong place. And if you're talking to somebody Do you just immediately start talking about the Lord, or do you talk to them about what their life is like? Get to know them. That's one of the things, and I talked about talking to neighbors. You don't have to like your neighbors, you just have to be kind to them. Don't tell anybody you're prepping unless you're very good friends. Because when things get tough, they may come over and take your stuff. If you're one that prepares for things and they're not, they're going to know that, so be careful. But be nice to them so that they don't immediately come over with guns a-blazing. Things are going to get tough. People are going to turn into wild animals. And when that happens, hopefully we'll be out of here. But if not, learn some basic techniques. Learn how to hide if you're in a house and you can build yourself a place to hide. We saw movies of the Old West if they were being overrun by bandits or Indians, and it's not the Indians' fault that they were on the rampage. So some white man usually ticked them off first. But they had floors they could open up and look inside, climb down in them, throw a carpet back over the top, and they wouldn't know they're there. One of our workers is driving around in his little four-wheel cart. He just looked at the restrooms to make sure they're okay. I can't go too much farther this way because I'm going to get into some active camps, and I don't like walking through people's campsites, so let me go ahead and wrap this up. I've got a few verses, but again, there's very little. Now, God has a sense of humor, so bear with me on this. What if little Jesus, who's working, Yeshua, working with his father in the little shop building something, maybe let him build a chair first. That's typically what we had our scouts build, a chair or a table. What if he hits his thumb? Did he holler out, "Ah, Jesus"? Yeah? I don't know. Pain can turn into bad behavior if we're not careful. Now, I don't know what he said or what he did. I'm sure he handled it properly. I wish I knew so that we could copy it. But if we do something wrong, we have a little religious experience. Knock something over in the supermarket and create a mess. Use his name in vain. I'm sure he gets that call. Well, I don't know, thousands of times a day, maybe millions around the world, where somebody's done something that they regret, an accident, but that seems to be the response. All right, let me wrap this up. All we know is really what Jesus became, not so much what he was. His life growing up was not important to be told. Other than that, he was smart, and he did what he was told. He learned his trade of his father. But his heavenly Father took precedent, wandering off from his parents and going to the temple. And he says to him, "Don't you know I should be in my Father's house?" So they knew, but they were worried for a little while. He made a point and a story for us, but that's it. Doing what he was supposed to do with God was more important than family. And he may have tried to tell them, I'm not ready to go yet, and they didn't listen. We don't know. But I would call that precocious. Okay, I'll do a little bit of study after this, but again, there's not very much on it. We just know that Jesus lived a human life as we are living, and he didn't sin. From our point of view, it seems impossible, and it is. But from God's point of view, Jesus set an example. See you later. God bless. Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and get into our lesson here. We're kind of talking about the early years of Christ, how he had to go through everything that we go through. I mean, he had to, I'm guessing, but he says he goes through everything as we have, so he may have stubbed his toe. I don't know any Jewish curse words, but I'm sure he didn't use them. But he might have cried. And we know Jesus cries because we saw him cry. The two main times are with Lazarus and when he rode into Jerusalem. So he has that ability, and probably quite a lot as a kid. Crying, like other emotions and things that we do, help release painkillers. Help us calm down. That's the way we're built. Okay, so I'm going to be in Luke most of the time. Might go over to Mark, but they're pretty much duplicate. So I'm going to go ahead and start in Luke 2. Let me start with 21. And when 8 days were completed for the circumcision of the child, his name was called Jesus, the name given him by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. Now when the days of purification in 22, days of purification according to the law of Moses were completed, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law, every male who opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and offer sacrifices according to what is said in the law, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Not a high priority from the point of view of not demanding a cow, assuming that most young parents can't afford that. And behold, there was a man in Jerusalem, his name was Simeon, and this man was just and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel. The Holy Spirit was upon him. The Holy Spirit used to cover people, not indwell. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he'd seen the Lord's Christ. So he came by the Spirit to the temple, and when his parents brought the child Jesus to him, according to the custom of the law, he took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace, according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of prophets. So he was recognizable by those that were covered by the Spirit, just as much as we will recognize the Antichrist, because we have the Spirit. That's why we can't be here. We got to get out of his way. After all the ceremonies, so when they had performed in 39 everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong in spirit. And I'm looking at my subtext. Okay. It just said that they emit spirit, but other verses have spirit, so I'm not sure why that text. I'd have to research that. In any case, he became strong. Some of the translation words that we have in this next sentence, it says he became strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Precocious, I used that word earlier. It's one of the reasons that I have multiple Bibles. If I'm studying something and I'm having a question on it here, I'll look it up in another translation. These are translations. If you're reading this in a language that we understand, which is English, it's a translation. In order to fully understand this, you'd have to read it in Greek and be fluent in Greek of this time period, because this is a very specific Greek. Okay. And then his parents went up in Jerusalem every year for the feast of Passover. Everybody did. It's one of the traveling feasts. And he was 20 years old. They went up to Jerusalem according to the custom of the feast. When they had finished the days and they returned, the boy Jesus lingered behind in Jerusalem. And Joseph and his mother did not know it. But supposing him to have been in the company, they went a day's journey and then sought him among their relatives. See, everybody traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover. So there might have been hundreds of people. So that's the reason they didn't know where he was at. And he wasn't a little kid anymore, so they weren't, terribly worried about it, but they still needed to know where he was. So when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem seeking him. Now so it was after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. All who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. So when they saw him, they were amazed, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have sought you we're very anxious when we sought you." So they were concerned, as any parent would be. He said to them, "Why did you seek me? Did you not know I must be about my father's business?" But they did not understand the statement which he spoke. And in 51, then he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and where he was subject to them. But his mother kept all these things in her heart, which basically means she didn't understand. She just filed all the stuff away into weirdo meter or whatever you want to call it. She didn't understand. She didn't have the Spirit yet. Her Son, God, we don't know how many miracles he did. We only know about the miracle of the wine. Is that his only miracle? I don't know. Being his mother, she could have seen other things. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. All right, and then the chapter jumps into John the Baptist. And that's basically all we know about Jesus. Very, very little. I think, again, they don't want us building idols, which we have anyway. The cross is meaningful, but people pray to the cross, not to Jesus. If you've got the Spirit in you, you just have to turn inward. You don't have to have an idol to pray to. I know we don't visualize good sometimes, but what images that we have of him are not accurate anyway. So don't be praying to idols of any kind, even idols of Jesus. Pray to him directly. He really does hear every prayer. Everything we say, everything we think, he is aware of it. If we're trying very hard to do something on our own, he may go, "Hey, Wake up, I'm right here. Do you need help? And a wise man will go, absolutely. And that's the key. That's what I'm really trying to say with these last couple of messages. Don't do this alone. We're going to get beat up like the false disciples did, because they were taking Paul's garments and rags and stuff and healing people until they ran into a tough demon and they got beat up. That won't happen to a true Christian, not by a demon. Humans, on the other part, you got to be careful. We've got tough times coming. I just watched a video on what to expect after an EMP bomb. And just to kind of recap that real quickly, an EMP bomb was one that, and we've all got them. All the countries that have nuclear power have EMP bombs. We learned during World War II that if you go in and you drop conventional bombs, which is why I don't understand what Russia's doing, if you drop traditional bombs, you're destroying the infrastructure. The people there will have no way of staying alive. Frankly, it's a type of punishment. If you really want to conquer a nation, you want to have them alive in such a way that you can command them to get back to work. Because then you're ruler over a country as opposed to a ruler over a ruined heap of what used to be civilization. So you use an EMP bomb. They go in and they spread their electrical killing capabilities out, electromagnetic pulse. But it goes out and it basically destroys anything that can handle electricity. It gets in the wires, it gets, it travels through the air. If it hits your car, you're going to knock your car out because it uses electricity. Modern cars have computers in them, but even older cars, it could knock them out. It can burn out circuits. You might be able to wire around them and get your older cars going. The newer ones, I think, could be, I'm trying to remember the guy's name that used to say this, but it's called DRT. Dead right there. Computers won't survive this. My phone will probably go dead, but there won't be a cell signal either because it'll knock out the cell towers. I think that's one of the things that bothers me the most about all this is we got so dependent upon these. And I got to see what was going to happen to us when this phone, my old phone, went bad. I did not know how to get to the phone store. I knew the direction of the freeway. I did not have a map. I do now, but I didn't have a map of Georgia. I know the basic routes, but I didn't. I've gotten so dependent on this phone that I didn't know. So I took off basically heading the direction I knew I had to go. I knew where the sun was, I knew where north was, and I recognized some of the cities along the way. I probably went further out of my way than I needed to, because I wasn't going to, having these navigators, I'll take backcountry roads, I'll drive through somebody's farm. Whatever the navigator tells me to do, I'll do it. But I won't do that unless I've got the navigator, because I can see it on the map, what's happening. So I got on a major freeway, drove to a major town. I still got off on the wrong exit because I didn't remember what the exit number was, but I got through and I got to the store and got a new phone. We're not going to be able to do that. If it happens and you're like me now, I'm a ways away from where I was staying last week. When everybody gets back, if the power goes out around the entire area, the cell phones go down, I have no way of getting there. I can only hope that maybe for some reason my car is spared. If it's not, I'm going to be tired walking, unless I can bum a ride. But this guy did a little timeline about, what's going to happen a second after. Well, everybody's going to stand around John with each other. What happened? We don't know what happened. Everything just died. I like talking about movies. If you remember there's a War of the Worlds, where the original one with, is that Gene Barry? I don't remember now. Some of the stuff's slipping out of my memory, which is bad. But they're in town, they're at the square dance, if you remember the movie, and the power goes out. And then they start looking around, and it's just, call the phone company. Well, the phone doesn't work because it knocks out everything. That was a type of EMP, but it knocks out everything to where you can't even use your landline. What are you going to do? They still had vehicles because they were far enough away. But there were power lines and phone lines going up into that area where the first spaceship hit in the movie. So that's why it followed it right back to its source and took out the source. And that's what an EMP bomb is designed to do. Take out infrastructure. Take away ability to communicate. Now, some circuits will still be working. Military will still have some capability. I worked on a satellite system, so it's designed to communicate during a nuclear attack. So it will take, quite a bit of EMP. You will have to take a direct hit to knock it out. So if they really want to do this, that might be what they do. But do we have defenses against that? Maybe. The bottom line here is that what would you do if you were stuck someplace, no transportation, and you want to get home? I mostly am in the county or a rural area, so I'm not going to fight with the city slickers that are going to be panicking. That's where your problems are going to be. If you live in a major city, you need to have a bug out plan in place now. We're getting closer. We're playing chicken with Russia right now. Who's going to blink? Russia blinked during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Putin, they're concerned about. He's a little crazier as opposed to our leader. If he's crazier than our leader, we're really in trouble. You should have, city maps, county maps, everything you can, paper backup, in case the technology goes down. You should have a little bit of food and water in your car. Granola bars, you don't need to last 6 months, but you need to have a little bit in case you're going to be gone from your home for a few days, however long it takes you to get there. Hopefully you live outside the city that you work in. Because if your home's inside the city, what are you bugging out to? You should always have, even if you live in the city, have a friend or something somewhere outside as a alternate. And if they're into being aware and prepping like you are, then they can help. But it's going to have to be a friend, somebody you trust, so you don't get there and are told to run away because they've got guns and they're going to take all your stuff. You don't know what this is going to do to the mental processes in people. Panic. Even if they know what's coming, panic. Even if they believe in Christ, panic. Because it's different. People don't like change. All right. Let me go ahead and end this now. I'm going to get on to some other topics here, but I think we're getting real close to something major happening. Days. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks at the most. November is my guess. It could start before that, but I'm thinking the biggest event will probably be in November. We're moving troops. We had just recently moved troops to the border in Romania, to the border with Ukraine. You don't do that unless you're planning on something. And they said that the group, the 101st Airborne that was moved there, they're not a defense-oriented group. Theirs is offense. Think about that. Okay. Till we meet in the clouds. Okay, here's our animals here. There's a goat. Sheep. There's some of our roosters. You just heard from one. The problem with sheep and goats are the same way, is they eat the vegetation right down to the ground. Cows can't do that, so the cattle farmers of the Old West used to fight with the sheep herders to keep them out of the area, because there'd be nothing left for their cows to eat if the sheep came through. Nice little lake over there. We're going to wander over there in a bit. I see a horse far off over there. Yeah. Hello, ladies, here I am. That's what he's saying. There are some hens back in a cage. I'll get a picture of them on the way back. More goats over here eating. One of them is standing in the food trough. I'm going to quickly drop by this building over here. It looks like it's got some farm equipment. Like there's an old steam engine. Some of the things that they used to have to use. Farming's been tough forever. Another old engine. Gas one for that one. Some of these are more modern than others, but there's a big pig back here. I'm going to cut back and see if we can find. There he is. He's eating too. They've been feeding everybody this morning. Yeah. You have a good breakfast? Hmm? Yeah. He's a good size. And there's more roosters over there. All right. This isn't smell-o-vision, so you get spared the bad parts of this. Let me go find a spot where I can get down to the lake. But this is a kind of a farm that they've set up here. I don't know what was here originally and what they've built, but it's made to look like a farm. But I guarantee you no farm had piped in electric capability. They would have used kerosene, the old lamps. All right, cut this off here and pick up another. Got a little plaque here, living in the water, the fresh water. What do we got? This is a largemouth bass. That's some kind of a crappie. I don't know which kind. We got turtles. There's some couple of tortoises here too. There's ducks and all kinds of stuff here. Let's wander over here and see where the lake is. It's got a little island out there. Don't know whether you could get to it or not. Certainly you could with a boat. There's some birds right there. Commonly known as ducks. And I got a little trail here to walk around, so let me walk over this way. And you don't have to follow me. I'll wait till I find something interesting.